everyone. My name is Julianne Meyer. I am the host of Own Your Wellness, and happy Thursday. Is it Thursday? I feel like I can't even tell what time it is anymore. This is what happens when you work from home. It's like the same day over and over again, just little things to remind you of which day of the week it is. But anyway, it's a good sign. It means we're keeping busy, or at least we are in this household. And movement is a good thing. Lots of movement going on. So anyway, enough about me. I'm excited. Today we have an amazing guest, and I know you guys don't want to wait a second longer to meet him. Garrett Wood is coming onto the show today. Hello, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Julianne.
So glad to have you here. I know the guests are excited to have you here too, because what you do and how you coach people is pretty amazing. And it's a hot topic. So why don't we start off with you telling us a bit about yourself and your own wellness journey?
Yeah, before I've ever been on this side of the work that I do with my clients, I've been on the other side. And that was true back when I was a strength and conditioning coach, as a manual therapist, as a hypnotherapist, and then even when I got some executive coaching myself when I was in the corporate world. Back pain, knee pain, hip pain, grumpy, relationships not going well at home, not fun at work in the boardroom. Pretty miserable existence there for a few years until I was able to be on this other side, and way more fun on this side. And so it's really nice to be able to share that exchange and different perspective with everybody else, my clients now, which is great. So
I love that. So did something actually happen that pushed you over the edge where like you had to make a change, or was it just kind of gradual?
Great question. When I finally left the corporate, kind of big, like multinational firm, I had seen someone spend their entire life at the organization. Like they came up there, worked like in the hospitality at the front desk, and then they were in a very high position where they were managing an entire coast of individuals. There was like, they probably had 500 people that reported to them, and their life and their identity and their family, he had met his partner there. So his entire life was at this organization, for 20 years. And something happened, and all of a sudden that was gone. He was no longer employed at the organization anymore. And it was really tragic for all those people. And because he only had his identity tied to his position and had for so long, it was really challenging for him to live on the other side of that, because everything he cared about was contained in those walls. And watching him kind of go through those struggles was really eye-opening for me, realizing that 3 weeks later, the company went on, there was someone in his position, and he was not doing as well as he was the previous, 30 years of his life, essentially. So,
I think that you touched on something that's really a good point. It's like there's so many of us that get really wrapped up in our identity into like what we're doing. And I think a lot of people, especially when COVID hit, had somewhat of that experience, because it's like all of a sudden now your income's gone, and also like who you were is no longer there. So I think a lot of people can sort of relate to that. Maybe obviously not being there quite as long, and COVID didn't last that long in comparison. But I just love that you were able to see that in somebody else and be able to think, how can I help?
Yeah, it was pretty wild watching that unfold. It's really unfortunate, really sad, super tragic. And then it's really nice to be on the other side, being able to help prevent that from happening from other people, because we suffer for our work, right? Especially when it's tied to our identity, and a win for the company is a win for us and vice versa. And that's what it feels like when I think we're doing it well. But at a certain point, that enmeshment gets a little too intense, and it can really, it's good for the bottom line for the company, but not for anybody else at a certain point.
Do you think that a lot of people take on more than what they're asked and they think that they're being asked of this, but it's like they emotionally attached to certain things. So it's like it becomes theirs. And, they were never actually asked to do any of that or feel that way. It's just, they make this assumption. Do you notice that with people, or am I making up my own theory.
You are definitely not alone in that. I know I did that myself. I had my pet projects that I was excited to see come to fruition, and it put a lot of time and energy and effort, and it was a big win. I'd be high, right? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. It's real. It's actually there. I was a part of that. That's so exciting. And then the same token, when it doesn't go well, right? Like, oh
Mhm.
no, oh, and having so much of your day to day emotional like window of tolerance depend on things that are, so many people involved in that, so many variables that are outside of the locus of your control. And if your entire identity or a majority of your identity is tied to that, you're gonna, you're gonna be awash in the storm, right? You're gonna be in
Yeah.
trouble there. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
there's definitely gonna be a point where that's gonna be an issue. I mean, think about people that retire, they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to retire," and then they die, like, a few months later because it's like they don't even know what to do with themselves afterwards. They waited their
Yeah.
whole lives to be done, and then then they're not sure. So, do you think that that's something that causes burnout?
Absolutely. I definitely think that when your identity is tied to your title, your position, and anything and everything that you kind of feel, you filter it through that identity, you get in
Mhm.
trouble because there's so much is outside of your control that when something bad happens, you feel it and it's a threat to your identity. And it's not a
Mhm.
challenge anymore
Yeah.
because people could take it away any moment, any time for anything, or it can be taken away by the pandemic, or it can be taken away by you not being able to show up as that best version of yourself because maybe you have something going on in your life, like a new addition to your family,
Mhm.
or, you know, and so how you used to really enjoy showing up at work, type A, driven, overachiever, company's expecting X, but I deliver this because that's who I am. And all of a sudden, you can't do that just at work. You have to do it for home, family, wherever else those energies need to go. It can get really challenging really quickly for people trying to make that transition. And that loss of identity, whether it's forced upon you or you can no longer perform like you used to. And so it's a judgment you make amongst yourself. That really does show up kind of hand in hand with people that are experiencing burnout for sure.
Do you think more people experience burnout and don't even recognize it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So, what are some signs for people that are kind of like, huh? I wonder if that's what's going on with me.
So one of the most unknown signs, right? Like if you were to Google burnout right now, and you're more than
Yeah.
welcome to do that, right? Please, and continue to watch, follow along, right? Participate. But if you were to Google burnout, one of them would be not feeling like what you do matters for the people that you're doing it for. And that's really important. And that is kind of usually mitigated by that direct relationship with
Mhm.
your colleagues or your supervisor. If your supervisor feels like they treat the work that you spent all night working on and they throw it in the trash, that is going to be the primary contributing factor to burnout. But one of the less known signs is boredom. If you show up and you're bored by what you do at work, most people think burnout, overwhelm, exhaustion, synonymous almost with like depression, like
Mhm.
restlessness, wanting to get out of bed but being unable to do so. But boredom is actually one of the signs that you're already there and you've been there for a long time. It just hasn't manifested itself to the like breaking point where you have to walk away.
That's really fascinating to me because I worked in this job and I literally was on call 24/7, literally for years. And, needless to say, I felt burnt out. But one of the things I was so bored and I had no idea I mean, it makes perfect sense now that you say that. And I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Huh. Is there a
Yeah.
way to come back from it? Or is it kind of like once it's there, you need to make a major change?
Great question. So recovering from burnout is really challenging because I think most people recover. They
Mhm.
change the job, maybe they get lucky and their supervisors changes for them. They change departments, they get promoted away from. Maybe the person experiencing that disruption in that interpersonal relationship moves to another department. All of a sudden, who they think is this stressor is
Yeah.
gone. Maybe it's a client and that client's gone. Maybe it's a project and that project's gone. Um, but then all of a sudden the feelings start creeping back in. And so
Mhm.
after a few rounds of that, people are a little bit more aware of what they're bringing to it, their own
Mhm.
innate traits that show up. And a lot of time it's understanding that what works and what you're able to do versus what you enjoy doing versus what you're good at and what the company or your position requires of you is this like little bit of a mismatch. And so when you have to put on a face to do your job, and it doesn't matter you're good at putting on that face, it doesn't matter that you like being good that you put on the face, it's still kind of a depleting effort. And after enough time, it gets too exhausting to continue to show up for that. And it's not just in that one position or with that one person. We take that kind of mask with us wherever we go, unless we're willing to sit down and kind of address the discrepancy between what's expected of us and ourselves and what we genuinely feel joy in our body doing. So if we get rid of like the shooting all over ourselves, it makes it a little bit easier to recover from burnout. If we don't do that, it's really challenging.
I love the idea too, that you mentioned. It's kind of like wherever you go, there you are. You can get rid of the situation, but you're still there. So it's going to happen again if you don't address what's causing it and like how you're showing up, not what's causing it on the outside, but on the inside. Oh my gosh. So is there a way, because like I know that some jobs require you to be, like have some sort of like maybe a professional wall or barrier or something like that. Does that mean if you get burnt out, does that mean it's just not the right thing for you? Or is there a way to, I don't know, still be authentic, but keep that wall?
It's a great question, right? Sometimes that mask is there to protect us because we can't, and sometimes it's there because of the job. So historically, burnout was talked about and studied really well in like a medical setting, primarily in like the ICU. So we have a lot of like nurses that are dealing with people that are in a very real life or death situation. And for them to be able to perform what they need to do to save this person's life, they get to put their emotions way back there.
Yeah.
And then there's only so long you can do that before it shows up as you being so disrupted from like who you actually are and what the job is. And that's where that gap of burnout shows up. If they were to bring those emotions to the table, literally the bedside manner in that moment, it would be helpful for them or the patient's family. And so there is like a very realness that they need to do to protect themselves and their job and the client's life or death in that situation. So we need to have breaks. Maybe we shouldn't do the same job for 40 years. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't. We need vacation time. We need downtime. But we also need to have restorative practices in the meantime.
Ooh, okay. For
Because
those that aren't familiar with restorative practices, what are you referring to?
so it can be really different. A lot of people are like, oh, restorative practice. That means yoga. And I'm like, sure. If you love yoga, that would be a restorative practice. And yoga is lovely. And there are a lot of amazing things about it. But if I go into a studio and I don't feel like I belong there, then yoga is not a restorative practice for me.
Yeah.
Right. Some people are like, oh, I love Ironmans and I'm going to go to Kona and compete. And that would not be a restorative practice for me either. And so knowing what really brings you joy, not just like what you're good at, what's healthy for you, but really getting all of those to kind of line up for you where it is enjoyable in of itself, where if you had all the time and money in the world, you would still be doing that thing. And that could be as silly as the other day, I got this new bookshelf right here and I had an opportunity to reorganize my books and it ended up being a really restorative practice. And I hate to say that in this environment, but it's like the last like opportunity that comes to mind. I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun. At the end of the day, I was like so satisfied. They're in order. I know where they are now. And that was super restorative. Would I recommend that for any of my clients? No. For me, it worked. Right.
I get that. And I think too, because I want to, for some of the people that are watching, could you define the difference between like restorative and like an escaping behavior? Because I know that, there's a lot of people that think, oh, I earned this glass of wine, at the end of their shift, but that's not the same as like restorative.
Yeah. So restorative versus escaping. So it's funny you mentioned the glass of wine because the nurse population is, there's a strong overlap there for sure.
Yeah.
If anybody's a nurse out there, as nursing friends, you are not alone when the glass turns into a bottle. You're in really good company, right? But a restorative practice with that, sure, it is a nervous system depressant. So 2 glasses of red wine it's going to get a little fuzzy around the edges, and some of the
Mhm.
intensity of those emotions washing through your body are going to get a little bit easier to move through. For sure. Absolutely. The problem is now you're dehydrated, we got some extra sugar, we're not getting really good restorative sleep. And so the
Mhm.
next day, we're actually less prepared than we were the day before. So if we keep that up for the week and week and week and week, it's a depleting practice over time. A
I
restorative
like
one would be one that does the same thing, but 3 weeks from now, you actually feel better because you did it. 3 months from now, you feel amazing because you did it. 3 years from now, if you have an attention span that lasts that long, I don't know many people that do.
Well, I kind of feel like restorative practices should be like brushing your teeth. It's just something that's part of your maintenance. And, in order to like, I might not always want to brush my teeth, but I'm going to because I really like my teeth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so many of those, like, taking a few moments to like look for opportunities for appreciation throughout your day, even if it was a bad day, maybe even especially if it was a bad day.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the last thing you want to do. I just get up out of the warm bed and like go brush your teeth in the harsh fluorescent light and then go back to bed and get comfy again. But it's worth doing because at the end of your life, you get to save the teeth, right? So,
Exactly. It's good for you. It's like eating your vegetables. Not everybody's a fan. But no, I like the idea of just sort of it's like feeding your soul in a way, just like instead of like your most authentic self, that's who you're helping instead of the mask. Is that kind of what you're saying or
yeah. So if we're going to have positions that require us to mask, okay, great. We just want to make sure that we're not feeding the mask at the expense of ourselves. Um,
yes.
yeah.
Okay.
And so getting really granular about what that joy is, I think
Mhm.
is the secret to coming up with like the escape from the like boom bust cycle of burnout, boredom, burnout, boredom, burnout, boredom. Um, at least that's been proven for my clients and myself. Some studies are out there. They're not quite there yet when it comes to executive leadership.
Mhm.
Authentic leadership is like a newer term. There's not a whole lot of studies out there. It's only been around for 30 years versus like
Oh.
servant and transformational, which has been around for 50 years. But all of that stuff takes forever to get to us as like the pop culture version where it sinks into our head, right? So but being able to know what your values are and moments that you've actually lived them, like that one time when I was 10, this thing was amazing. All right, when I was
Mhm.
20, this thing happened. Okay, great. What are all those commonalities? How can I
Mhm.
actively participate in those in my job, at home, in my relationships? What does that actually look like? Yeah,
Do you find too that burnout's easier? Because like if you are I want to I feel like this is like a huge deal and it's something that I've never heard of burnout quite like this before. So I know I'm not the only one. It seems like if you're so busy being the mask and not like who you are, if you could try and be you as much as possible without a mask, then it helps with the burnout, right? It doesn't happen
exactly.
quite so dramatically. And do you think too that people just put like really high expectations on themselves? You mentioned like if you just have a baby and you're trying to I mean, first of all, you're probably not getting any sleep. So your entire personal life is completely changed and you're still trying to function and act like nothing at home has changed. That just seems like an impossible level to keep and an impossible, something that people probably still expect as a boss, but is that something that people should address with like their colleagues or I mean, what would you suggest for that?
I am so excited that we are living in a post-COVID world. We are coming out of the intensity of like the height of lockdown, where it was really interesting because people switched to more of this kind of style of interaction as like a lot of people did. And
Mhm.
so kids were really close. They weren't somewhere else. They were in your workspace with you. I remember there was like a news anchor who was like reporting in and his child opened the door and came in and he was like, and we're like, oh, wait, you're a person. You're not just like an analyst. You're not just a business person. You have a child, right? I think we all remember as students seeing a teacher out at the grocery store and being like, you're real. You're a real person. You eat food? What?
What? you're human? You don't
Yeah.
just live in the classroom and like turn on when the class starts?
Right, the bell rang, boom, okay, let's go, yeah. And I think if we see the teacher out, like, it makes it real for us. Like, we know in theory, but then really seeing it, it brings it to life. Seeing those kids, come in, people's pets come in. Not only does it make us appreciate our coworkers and colleagues and bosses and team members more because we're like, "Oh, they're a real person.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting. Okay, there's real people in their lives." I think it gives us a chance to talk about the expectations of what it means to be professional and
Mm,
be a person at work. And I think we can move that a little bit different than historically, where we're like in a boardroom, dressed in our suits, just dressed to impress, very specific script that we all have to follow. And if we're not following it,
mhm.
we're strange. Now we have
Mhm.
a little, it's strange. It is
Yeah.
strange. So then we can be a little bit more of ourselves because there is that transition, which is my favorite part of COVID. That's like the silver lining I've been able to try to find between myself, my clients, and the practice. So
No, I like that because it does. It changes everything. There's always something good. It comes back to having gratitude and looking for the good things in your life on those bad days anyway, because if the more you look for it, the more you'll see, because it's always there. Whether or not you see it, that's kind of up to you, right?
for
So
sure.
what are I'm just curious if somebody is struggling with burnout, which is, so much more common than people give it credit for. Um, are there ways like that you would suggest somebody start their morning to just kind of like reconnect with who they are, or what would you suggest?
Uh, I have two answers. One, sleep, right, which is like a throwaway answer, but it's true. The more you sleep, if we don't sleep, it's really challenging to show up as a good version of ourselves. We're so depleted. It's like the base of all of the like fancy technology of our body is built upon sleep, and if we don't have that, it all breaks down really terribly.
Mhm.
Um, and so that being said, the more challenging answer is if people are having troubles getting to sleep, we have to address what those are more specifically, and that would be very unique to that person and what's going on for them. But if it requires you to take a look at all of your sick days that you have or do not have and use them, it would be really powerful to be able to hit pause instead of having to like light a fire, throw a cocktail, and like let the whole bridge burn down. There are people that might be the healthiest decision for them to do. I'm not saying that's wrong. There are time and a place where that is the best thing to do, and you should do that. And absolutely high five. But there are a lot of us that's probably not like reasonable or actionable for us to do. So
Yeah.
we do have to look for chances where we can like get in some extra hours of sleep or take a nap or take our sick days and actually care for ourselves. Um, yeah,
Yeah. No, I like that idea too, because they're there for a reason. And it's still better to, if you're going to use them, have them as preventative as opposed to, and self care as opposed to dying in your bed. Because, I mean, and then even when you come back, it's like you're not even 100%. So, yeah, I like the idea of using those days in a productive way if possible.
yeah,
I think that you bring up a really good point too, that, not one size fits all. It's different for everybody. And, like sometimes it is okay to just burn the bridge, baby. That's what it takes for you to be okay. I
yeah.
like that. We do need to go to commercial break. So we're going to be back in just a minute. Okay.
Excellent.
For those of you who are watching us live, thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned, it's time for those commercials. So we'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome to E360 TV, the live streaming and on-demand destination for influential voices and enlightened audiences. We offer trending, grassroots, and purpose-driven content across a diverse range of interests. E360 TV is more than just watching programs. We offer the ability to interact with live shows connecting audiences to real, authentic influencers and storytellers while streaming to millions of devices. Real experiences. Raw conversation. One destination for it all. E360 TV.
Welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us now, we are interviewing and having a conversation with Garrett Wood. Let's bring him back. Welcome back to the show. So, during the commercials, I was thinking about a few things, and I had a client this morning, and I was telling her about how I was going to be talking with you today, and she was asking me about what your specialty was. And so something I had mentioned to her was imposter syndrome. Can you explain what that, I mean, it seems like a term that is just being used like crazy now, and it didn't used to exist. So can you please explain?
So there's the original definition, and then there's the colloquial one, which we all use. I think the one that we all use is a common feeling where we feel like we are going to be found out. That somehow, whatever position we're in, whatever activity we're doing, whatever responsibility we've been given, whoever gave it to us is wrong. That we are somehow not really who they think we are. And that makes us feel uncomfortable, like we're going to be found out at any moment. And it creates a feeling of anxiety, scary, like overwhelming. And so it makes it really challenging to take on new ideas, concepts, projects, things like that. It makes it really feel like the stakes are high. So it makes it really challenging to be okay making a mistake. And if we're not allowed to make mistakes and we're a human and we don't get good sleep, I just keep talking about sleep, but if we don't get, it's going to be bad. And so it feels like a really dangerous place to live our life like that. And so stress levels are through the roof. And that is honestly one of the biggest contributors to burnout that I see, is this internal expectation of feeling like I'm not good enough for what people's expectations of me are. And that's a self-imposed perception of what you think other people think about you. So it's like a theory of mind trick here that we're playing on ourselves. And we often see ourselves at our worst, and other people only see us at our best. So there is a normal gap there in perception. But those people also see themselves at their worst. And so they're actually, probably just like you and me, and we all have our insecurities and we're all doing the best we can. And it's really challenging sometimes to believe that. Yeah.
It is. And, I think a lot of people struggle with that. Do you think that that's kind of like low self-esteem, or is there a difference?
Sometimes it can come from high self-esteem.
Interesting. Can you
In
explain
that,
that?
yeah, that we are a person who gets things done. And sometimes it's really easy for us to get things done. And sometimes it's really, 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 really challenging to get things done. But that doesn't stop us. We'll still get it done at great expense to our relationships, ourselves, our family. Yeah, our values. And that's where like wearing that mask becomes, we're feeding the mask versus ourselves, and we get that split and we get in trouble when we do that for a long time.
I like that. I never even thought about it that way before. That's a fascinating way to look at it, because I know and then there's that perfectionism, trying to do absolutely. It seems like a lot of these things kind of go hand in hand. Do you think that all of these contribute to burnout, or is it just kind of like, I mean, do your clients tend to have more than one issue is what I'm getting at? Because that's, like who you work with.
So most of the time, they're not presenting with one issue. Burnout's kind of like an umbrella term, right?
Gotcha.
And then we go, oh, okay, what's the contributing factor? And they're like, it's my boss. And you're like, yeah, okay, that boss is a jerky boss, right? And that is true. That is absolutely true. I'm not trying to invalidate anybody in that. Yes, that happens. And it's probably the biggest contributing factor for most people to enter into that experience. My favorite story about that is like, they did a study on college kids and they paid them $5 for every airplane they turned in. And the proctor of the psychological experiment would do three things. They'd either put the airplane on a shelf up high, or they would leave it on the desk, or they would crumple it up and throw it away. And it didn't matter what the person did with the plane, they got paid $5 every plane they turned in. But the people that had their plane thrown away left that experiment pretty quickly. Because of that feeling that came with the lack of appreciation of their effort. People don't do jobs because they get paid. That's the prerequisite. They have to have that there. They will get underpaid, and they will do jobs that they could be getting paid more elsewhere if they know that what they're doing matters and it's important for them to be doing it, and they enjoy that people recognize their skill at it. And so if your boss doesn't feel like you're appreciated by them, that's going to be a really, that's like having that proctor throw away that paper airplane every day. And it's going to be challenging to maintain that relationship.
Yeah. No, I love that you say that, because there's jobs where, well, I worked in addiction recovery, and this is what was actually really fascinating to me was there was, in that industry, there's a lot of not so good people.
Sure.
Yeah. And so there was a particular rehab that was under investigation by the FBI, which is actually fairly common. And they stopped paying their employees. And so I can't even tell you how many people we hired away from them. They weren't being paid for like maybe 2 months. And these people still came back to work because they're like, we can't leave the clients there. It was just it was so touching. But at the same time, I'm like, get out. You still have to pay your bills. So yeah, no, that's a really good point though. So anyway, we basically barely touched on you coaching, but I popped up your website right here. What can people find on your website?
Yeah, on my website, I think the most interesting thing people can find is an opportunity to book a little quick phone call. Because people have questions. It's a really broad topic. Is burnout the number one issue in your life, or is it something else that's going on? Is there something that's contributing to the burnout that is in your control? Is it time to let it all burn, or is that totally not appropriate for you at all, but we still have to figure out something that does work? It's really nuanced. And so a lot of people have some really serious questions about their situation. And so if they want to go on there and spend 15 minutes hanging out with me, it doesn't sound like a lot of time, but often we can get like something that they can do that inspires them to feel that hope. And being able to feel that in your body is the exact opposite of what burnout feels like, actually.
No, I think that's a really good point. 15 minutes is actually pretty generous, because anything longer than that, I mean, obviously it turns into like a regular coaching session. Sure. But yeah, you could get a lot in 15 minutes. So that's very generous of you. So I just want to make sure we leave that up there for a minute so people can write it down and go visit you. But also, we're going to talk about your Instagram. So people can find you on Instagram too. What can people find there?
So on Instagram, you're going to see like the evolution of my business if you want to stalk and go all the way back to the beginning, which is kind of fun. Because I think it's really interesting when you're involved in helping people. You kind of know what you think works. And then if you work with enough people, you're like, well, that works, but there's still this other population that I'm not able to address their needs at all. What the heck is going on there? And I have felt that forever. And so if you follow my Instagram account, you will see the evolution of that process where I think I'm doing something. I think it's more than enough. It helps some people. Then there's a ton of people that need more help. And then it continues to evolve. So I've been doing that since probably 2004, Instagram 2011. So if you go back through, you'll see all the different iterations of that, which I think is kind of fun.
That is fun. I like that too, because then you don't get bored because there's always something new and a different aspect and way to help people. So is it possible too, because you mentioned that boredom is a sign of burnout, but can people just be bored too without burnout?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that shows up with boredom is we're not excited about the task we're doing. Sometimes that can be because we don't have enough resources to get excited about something,
Yeah.
or it means we're so overwhelmed in that moment that we can't think creatively about something that would be exciting.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. Or we're there and we don't want to do it anymore, but we have to for good reasons, some not so good reasons. But if we can't leave on our own and we don't have that autonomy, that's when boredom typically kicks in for most people.
That's fascinating. And, I think that you brought up a really good way to look at it is there's that creativity. So I'm going to give an example because I think this is a really good way to, beat the boredom, like an example. I used to work in pharmacy. I worked in long-term care pharmacy, which means we used to blister pack things. And for those of you who don't know what blister packing is, when you get the medicines and you have to push it out from like the tin foil, I used to take put them in there and then make a machine go down and seal it. So people can return those types of drugs to the long-term care pharmacy because they haven't been touched since they left the pharmacy. So we get some back when people pass away or whatever the case may be, or from the jails and things like that. So now we have to put all those pills that we packed away back in the bottles. So we used to do these things called punch out wars. So we would race and punch out those things as fast as we could. It was the most mundane, boring job you can ever imagine. But we were able to create it into something that we enjoyed because we still had to do it. So I think that there's always ways if you can look at it creatively. That was the word you mentioned, was creatively. And I think that that's a really good point that I just wanted to reiterate because there's always a way you can make it more fun if you're willing to look at it that way.
Yeah.
So
if you have those resources to make it creative in the moment, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why not? Even just that one time it would help. Even if you never do it like that again or whatever the case may be. But what are some things that, are common challenges that you see across the board? Because I know that everybody is different and everybody's situation is different. But what are some things that, people tend to really come to you for, like in, like are struggling with maybe emotionally or, I just want other people out there to realize they're not alone is what I'm getting at. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned the imposter syndrome, the perfectionist. These are things that put us in a situation where the stakes feel really high. We can't make a mistake. If we live in that state for a long period of time, we're not good versions of ourselves because we have to be able to relax and enjoy ourselves. And if we don't have access to that because we believe those things about ourselves, we get in trouble really quickly. It doesn't matter what position you're at, what relationship you're in, those will show up. And most of the time, those beliefs aren't necessarily about where you're at or who you're with. They might trigger it and make it worse and more apparent. But they also show up from where we've come from, some of our painful past learning that we've gone through. And so a lot of individuals have these kind of implicit assumptions they make about themselves. And those beliefs are the things that keep them stuck doing more of the things that frustrate them, that get them bored, that get them overwhelmed, because it doesn't feel like there's some other option out there. And so their creativity is limited just because they can't think about something else, because they believe something about themselves that isn't true, but they've never felt differently. And so it gets really challenging there.
I like that. That's, there's a lot of people that do feel stuck too. And I know that once you're in that cycle, it can be hard to see a way out. I think about too, like in perfectionism in particular, I never thought of myself as a perfectionist until people started telling me that, like pointing it out to me. do you see that or notice people that don't even see things about themselves like that, where it's so obvious to other people, but maybe, if they want to start looking at themselves, like, how do you see something that you can't see is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. How does the fish realize that they're wet, right? That kind of question. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. When you've tried so many different things and none of it quite seems to work really, that's when it's worth questioning, like, okay, what are the assumptions I'm making here? And so sometimes it's good to ask like people that you trust and that you know love you and have the best interest for you, as long as those are healthy relationships. And if they're not, that's often the best time to reach out to a professional.
No, I like that. I always talk to about on the show about how nobody needs a coach. Like Michael Jordan doesn't need a coach, but he has a coach. Like, it's it's just one of those things that if you can figure it out quicker, why wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
like that. Um, so I'm just curious too. What does it look like to work with you?
It looks a lot like this, right? So this is my office. This is my setup. Hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear. And this is, these are my headphones, my mic. But people show up. We work session to session. As long as they're seeing value, we keep going. There is a lot of interesting individuals that I enjoy working with that they're in a position where they really just need like someone to kind of sharpen the pencil a little bit. And it's
Oh,
just a little bit of that work and they're good to go. And then there's other individuals that are like, hey, I really haven't had a lot of opportunities to kind of have a safe environment to practice some of this stuff. So we do a
mhm.
lot of that together. And then other individuals are like really hard charging. They're having a blast. They're kicking butt and taking names. And they want to do even more of that sooner, faster. And a lot of the times it's like, as a coach, I'm like pulling the reins on that in a way that slowing them down to make sure it stays healthy for them.
Yeah.
Because that's where they get that boom bust cycle that they get really frustrated with.
What are your thoughts on the idea of balance? Because
Great.
you hear this term all that I've got my own thoughts, but I would love to hear what you like. Do you think balance is possible?
Yes, people can stand on one foot and brush their teeth if they practice really hard at it. Balance, I think sometimes we think about it theoretically, like, oh, in a perfect world, it would look like this. And then we have the
Mhm.
reality and we have the practice. I don't know if we're so much looking for like that theoretical version. And I think if we're striving for that, we will continually be disappointed and frustrated with our own inability to make it happen, which
Mhm.
is shame inducing, which is spiral inducing, and then we get in trouble. Something that might be better instead of looking for balance would be looking for enjoyment, like contentment, actual like embodied joy, not necessarily happiness, but little moments where you're just like, that was good. That went well. That was okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like too the for people that are watching, there is a difference between happiness and joy. Joy is an internal thing that isn't reliant on necessarily outside things. Like you can feel joy even when you're sad. It's a fascinating subject. It's a big subject, but anyway, something else that I want to touch on since we have a little bit of time is you've
Yeah.
mentioned sleep a few times. And there's this, and the saying, I'll sleep when I die. And my thing has always been like, well, then plan on dying a lot sooner because you don't realize how important it is to you and for you. But something that you touched on briefly was, how maybe if you have difficulty falling asleep, are there like some tips or tricks that people could try just like without you even maybe talking to them, like just that are watching right now?
Yeah. So the importance of sleep is something I love talking about because people overlook it.
Mhm.
But artificial intelligence systems, computer programs sleep. And if they don't sleep, they do error codes all day long and they get less efficient at what they do. So that I think is fascinating. Animals sleep. Some animals sleep moving. It's strange. Like we all have these programs where we have to reboot. And the process of sleep is actually valuable because it actually is when your body updates its beliefs about itself. So if
Hmm.
you're encountering new information about yourself, you're trying to change what's happening to do something different because you don't want it to be what's happened before in the past. You want it to be a new possibility and
Mhm.
you're not sleeping. It's going to be really challenging for that part of your brain to be able to reform itself in a way that it's going to be able to help you do that. So you end up working against yourself. That's not just like strength and conditioning, even that would be true, but also mentally, emotionally as well. So if you're trying to be stronger mentally, emotionally, physically, sleep is important. And if you're not getting sleep, I'm less concerned with going to bed at the same time, and I'm more concerned with not sleeping in. So your body will sleep. People who have insomnia, they get sleep. They get REM sleep. They may not remember it. They may be dreaming that they're awake, but they actually do get sleep. So their body will force you to sleep. It's a natural process. It will happen. The difference is if you wake up at 5 in the morning every morning, and on the weekends you sleep until 11, if you have the luxury of doing that, you are now like you flew across the country and you have what they call social jet lag, but it's just throwing off your circadian rhythm. And so it's really challenging. You might as well have like had a fifth of vodka. Like it's that disruptive to your endocrine system. It's that disruptive to your circadian rhythm. And it's going to be challenging. So it'd be better to wake up at 5 still on Saturday, if that's your routine Monday through Friday. I'm sorry for you and I apologize. But if that's what you and you want to try wake up Saturday at 5 and then get up, drink some water, do a bowel movement, walk around, do a little errand, a little chore that's not too stimulating, and then later go back to bed. And that will end up being healthier for most people and make it easier for them to get back to sleep at a consistent time.
I love that. I didn't know that sleeping in, like on the weekends was that big of a deal. That's crazy because I just got back from Greece and I'm telling you, that was brutal. The jet lag, the way back was way worse than the way there because I don't know, it was like the same day twice and I was up for 24 hours straight. I haven't done that since, well, in like 25 years. So it's been a long time. So my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So are there things too that like, because I know for me, I used to have difficulty sleeping, but I also know that like taking medicine for that isn't necessarily the best idea. But if that, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation to have with your doctor. Supplements too. So whoever your primary care physician is, whether that's like a naturopath or a psychiatrist, they can definitely prescribe you a way to do an intervention that would be based upon your physiology and what they know about you. But there are other things we can do outside of that. Caffeine is a drug that we all have access to readily. And there are times and places we can consume it that will hinder our ability to get to sleep regularly. And there's times where it may actually enhance it too, which is fascinating. So water, hydration. But yeah, there's definitely things to do. But if we aren't consistent, it would not matter.
So consistency is key. That's the big takeaway for that one. I love that. That's like easy to remember.
Yeah. So if you wake
no.
up at 5, keep waking up at 5, take naps instead. That's the secret, I guess, if we want to say it.
I like that because I know for me it's always harder. I'd rather just get up and even now, like I'll wake up when I normally get up anyway. So my body's like, it's time to get up. And if I went to bed late, then I'll take a nap because I need to get up when I need to get up. My body's like, it's time, girl.
Perfect.
But anyway, we are running a little bit low on time. We only have like a couple minutes left. I'm just curious, is there anything that you'd love to share with the audience that maybe you haven't yet, or if you want to reiterate something?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about some of those beliefs that show up that may be implicit that we don't know. That other people might know about us, whether we know it or not. But they're based upon things and experiences that we had, and they're there for a good reason. They just may not be the things we want to believe about ourselves moving forward. And so making those explicit is really important. And then figuring out a way to reconceptualize that that's comfortable without triggering those like feelings of threats or anxiety is the way through that. And that's where I see most of my clients really make a change. So when they stop considering themselves an imposter, when they stop expecting themselves to be the perfect mom and the perfect CEO at the same time on the same day, every day, which is just not nice. Not in the way we have set up work for moms anyway. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very good point too. I mean, if you happen to have one of those days, then more power to you, but expecting that out of yourself is pretty ridiculous. I mean, I don't know anybody who can be on, because that's the thing, you're on That's a long time to, trying to be perfect and 100%. And like, it's a mask, that's really, I don't know anybody who could do that. So no, that's a really good point. I'm just curious too, if somebody's experiencing burnout, does it take a long time to overcome it? Does it take a long time or can it just like start getting better with a few changes and then get better depending on what your choices are?
Yeah, it depends on which round you're at. If it's round 10 of burning out, it's going to be way more challenging than round 2, for sure.
That
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, cool. Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Real quick, I'm going to pop up your Instagram one more time so that people can reach out to you there and see the evolution of your business. So,
Yeah, I love it.
And I'm sure they can reach out to you on there as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and they can click through to the website from there is what they want to.
Oh, perfect. There you go. That's kind of cool. One-stop shopping. I assume you can get to the Instagram from the website as well.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I'm going to pop that one up too. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I actually learned some stuff and I'm excited about it. So thank you. I know that I'm not the only one. So I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And hopefully you'll be back again soon.
It'll be awesome.
Awesome. Have a great night.
You too.
All right, everyone, that is all the time that we have for the show today. I just want to say thank you for joining us. And next week on Monday, we're going to be talking about some healthy habits and tips to get you through those holidays, those meals, and all those times you don't really feel like keeping those health commitments. So until then, enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, and we will see you next week.